In the vast ocean of the Buddhist teachings, the Noble Eightfold Path stands as the compass that points directly toward the end of suffering. Among its 8 limbs, there is one that often receives less attention, yet touches every single day of our lives: right livelihood. Unlike meditation, which we may practice in designated hours, or right speech, which we may momentarily forget and return to, livelihood is continuous. From morning to night, it is the way we sustain ourselves, the way we interact with the world, and the way we shape the future of our consciousness, knowingly or unknowingly. When people first hear the term right livelihood, their minds tend to gravitate toward questions of morality and career choices, what jobs are ethically acceptable and what jobs should be avoided. While this is part of the teaching, it only scratches the surface. Right livelihood, in its deeper spiritual meaning, is not merely about how we earn money, but how we live. It is about the quality of our relationship to life itself, the intentions that guide our daily actions, and the way we nourish not only our bodies, but also our minds. In this sense, livelihood becomes an existential path, not just an economic one. In modern society, livelihood is often reduced to career, a word that implies advancement, reputation, financial gain, and identity. It becomes something we are told to build, climb, or achieve. The Buddha's view is strikingly different. For him, livelihood is not about acquiring, but about aligning. It is not about gain, but about harmony with the Dhamma, with ethics, and with the deep inner knowing of what leads to peace and what leads to suffering. It is a spiritual practice in the most ordinary sense. What do you do to feed yourself? And what do you feed yourself with? This lecture begins with the understanding that we are not merely economic beings trying to survive. We are conscious beings, and the way we live has direct consequences on the state of our consciousness. What we do to sustain our physical lives inevitably affects our inner world. There is no separation between livelihood and mental health, between livelihood and mindfulness, between livelihood and the path to awakening. Whether one is a farmer, a teacher, a monk, a coder, a nurse, or a business owner, the question is the same. Is your way of living contributing to craving, ignorance, and agitation? Or is it supporting clarity, compassion, and inner peace? In the Buddhist tradition, there is a powerful image: a person trying to cross a river with a raft. The Eightfold Path is that raft. Each part of it is essential: right view, right intention, right speech, right action, and so on. But if any one piece is weak, the whole raft wobbles. Right livelihood is one of those planks. It supports the rest. If your way of living is in contradiction to your ethics or your practice, it quietly sabotages your path. A person cannot sit in meditation peacefully at night if they have spent the day harming others for profit. One cannot cultivate loving kindness if their livelihood encourages greed, manipulation, or deceit. The internal world is not isolated from the external one. They are two reflections of the same mind. In this exploration, we will look beyond rules and prohibitions. Instead, we will reflect on the deeper meaning of living rightly. We will explore how the Buddha defined right and wrong livelihood, and more importantly, why. We will look at how livelihood affects not only society and others, but also one's own mental conditioning. We will see how the way we earn our food becomes the food of our karma. And we will ask the difficult questions. Can we choose a path of work that aligns with wisdom rather than craving? Can we feed the body in ways that also feed clarity of mind? Can we live without harming ourselves, even while trying to survive? To feed body and mind rightly is a spiritual aspiration. It is the understanding that not all food is nourishment, and not all work is wholesome. It is a call to see that every aspect of our life matters: how we speak, how we move, how we earn, how we consume. Livelihood is a mirror that reflects our values and our view of life. In this lecture, we will hold up that mirror, not to judge, but to see, not to idealize, but to clarify. Because in seeing clearly, we open the door to living rightly, not perfectly, but wisely, step by step. Let us now walk deeper into this teaching, not with guilt or anxiety, but with openness and inquiry. Let us examine how the Buddha's vision of right livelihood is not a restriction, but a liberation, a way of living in the world without being entangled in it. Let us explore how work, when grounded in wisdom, becomes a path of practice, and how feeding the body rightly can become a gateway to feeding the mind with peace. To understand right livelihood in its full spiritual scope, we must return to its original root, in the Buddha's words. The Pāli term Sammā-ājīva is not merely a label for ethical job or acceptable profession. It is a deep expression of how one aligns their means of sustenance with the Noble Eightfold Path. Let us begin by unpacking the meaning of the term itself. In Pāli, the word Sammā means right, complete, correct, or harmonious. It is not simply the opposite of wrong in a moralistic sense. Rather, it refers to what is in accord with Dhamma, what supports awakening, what leads to peace and the end of dukkha. The second part of the word, ājīva, refers to livelihood, sustenance, or means of living. It includes the ways we earn our food, acquire resources, and maintain life in the world. When combined, Sammā-ājīva means not just right work, but a livelihood that is in harmony with the path to liberation. In the Majjhima Nikaya, the Buddha clarifies that right livelihood is one of the three factors belonging to the training in ethical conduct, alongside right speech and right action. Ethics in Buddhism is not a set of commandments from a god or authority, but a natural reflection of cause and effect. One acts ethically not out of fear, but out of understanding. When we harm others, we also agitate and disturb our own mind. When we live dishonestly, exploitatively, or violently, we plant the seeds of inner restlessness, guilt, and delusion. Thus, right livelihood is an ethical commitment not to disturb the peace, neither our own, nor that of others. The Buddha was very clear about certain forms of livelihood that are to be avoided. In the Vinaya Sutta, he names 5 kinds of business that a lay follower should refrain from. Business in weapons, selling tools of violence, and killing. Business in human beings, trafficking or exploiting people as property. Business in meat, trading in the flesh of sentient beings. Business in intoxicants, substances that cloud the mind. Business in poison, selling substances meant to harm or destroy. Each of these forms of livelihood, the Buddha explains, is inherently tied to harm. They are incompatible with the cultivation of compassion, mindfulness, and liberation. The principle here is not arbitrary. It is grounded in the law of karma, intentional action, and its results. When our livelihood supports violence, delusion, or addiction in society, we are not just harming others, we are participating in the collective reinforcement of suffering. But the Buddha's teachings do not stop at this list. He also encourages deep reflection on subtle forms of unwholesome livelihood, forms that may appear outwardly harmless, yet inwardly corrupt the mind. In the Sammā-ājīva Sutta, he mentions examples of ascetics who engage in fortune-telling, astrology, dream interpretation, snake charming, and other practices aimed at gaining followers or wealth through deception or superstition. While these may not involve direct violence, they are still unwholesome because they rely on manipulation and false claims, thus steering others away from truth. In the Manakattarasaka Sutta, the Buddha links right livelihood to right intention and right view. In other words, one's livelihood must arise from wise intention, free from greed, hatred, and delusion. It must be supported by an understanding of cause and effect, the nature of suffering, and the path to its cessation. This connection is crucial. One might technically avoid the 5 wrong livelihoods, yet still engage in work that feeds greed or distraction in others, through advertising, for example, or industries based on entertainment addiction. The Buddha would not call such work right livelihood, because its impact conditions craving and agitation. The Dhamma is subtle, and so is right livelihood. It is not about social status or legality. One may be praised by the world yet live in contradiction to the Dhamma. One may be poor yet live nobly. The question the Buddha asks is simple. Does your livelihood lead to more suffering or less? Does it support the path or obstruct it? Furthermore, right livelihood is not judged solely by external actions, but by the intention and awareness behind them. A butcher who has never reflected on the nature of suffering is not the same as one who continues such a profession after deeply understanding the first noble truth. The Buddha does not condemn people. He points out the nature of actions and their consequences. When we truly see the suffering our livelihood causes, to ourselves and others, compassion naturally arises. This seeing is the seed of transformation. It is important to understand that the Buddha did not demand monks or lay people to become poor or passive. He praised diligence, responsibility, and effort. But he always emphasized that livelihood must be rooted in ethics and wisdom. In the Sigalovada Sutta, he advises lay disciples to divide their wealth wisely, using one part for daily needs, one part for reinvestment, and one part for savings and generosity. He speaks of work done with honesty, skill, and effort as a blessing. The issue is never work itself, it is the intention, the effect, and the attachment that matter. In the modern world, the landscape of livelihood has changed. There are now countless new forms of work, digital platforms, global corporations, virtual economies. But the principles remain unchanged. Whether one is developing software or farming vegetables, the question remains, is my work a form of service or harm? Is it rooted in mindfulness or distraction? Does it bring others closer to the Dhamma or further into delusion? In summary, Sammā-ājīva is a deeply personal and spiritual commitment. It is the choice to live in a way that supports peace, not just in society, but within the heart. It is a path of integrity, not perfection. It is a continual inquiry into how our way of earning connects to our way of being. To live rightly is not to conform to a rulebook, but to align one's life with truth, compassion, and freedom from clinging. In the journey of spiritual awakening, the body is both a vessel and a testing ground. It is through the body that we experience hunger, fatigue, sickness, pleasure, and pain. It is also through the body that we act in the world, working, speaking, interacting. Thus, how we sustain the body becomes not just a practical concern, but a deeply spiritual one. The Buddha's teaching on right livelihood urges us to look carefully. Are we feeding the body in a way that also nourishes the path to liberation? To feed the body rightly means to examine the source of our sustenance, not just what we eat, but how we obtain the means to live. This includes food, shelter, clothing, and medicine, the four requisites recognized in the monastic tradition. These are seen not as luxuries or rights, but as supports for the practice of Dhamma. Right livelihood begins with this humility. The body has needs, and those needs can be met without excess, harm, or clinging. The Buddha praised simplicity as a path to freedom, not because poverty itself is noble, but because craving is a bondage. When livelihood becomes a means to accumulate, display, or dominate, it shifts from sustenance to status. Right livelihood brings us back to the question: what is enough? When is the body well supported, and when are we simply feeding desires? Simplicity does not mean neglect. It means contentment with little. Santasati. In the Dhammapada, the Buddha says, contentment is the highest wealth. He taught that one who is content, though possessing little, is truly rich. Meanwhile, one who has wealth but is constantly craving more is like a beggar, always unsatisfied. Right livelihood calls us to reassess what we are chasing in the name of survival. Are we earning to live, or living to earn? Another crucial question is whether our way of feeding the body supports ethical living. In the 5 precepts, lay practitioners commit to refraining from killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, false speech, and intoxicants. These are not dogmas. They are tools for preserving peace of mind. A livelihood that pressures us to lie, cheat, or harm others inevitably puts us in conflict with our own values. Even if the income is good, the cost is often invisible: anxiety, guilt, inner fragmentation. Right livelihood means that our work should not require us to violate our ethics just to survive. If our job demands dishonesty, we are trading integrity for income. If it pressures us to harm others, physically, emotionally, financially, we are nourishing the body by starving the heart. This imbalance creates a tension that no external success can ease. It is like drinking salt water. It appears to quench thirst, but ultimately deepens the craving. There are, of course, difficult situations. Some people find themselves in jobs they never intended, or inherited professions that bring conflict with Dhamma. The Buddha did not advocate for rash decisions or self-harm. Instead, he encouraged gradual realignment. Awareness is the first step. Once we see that our livelihood is unwholesome, we can begin to explore alternatives, not always instantly, but with sincerity. Even the aspiration to change begins to shift the karmic momentum. A practical reflection here is to examine: what does my job actually produce in the world? Is it adding value or extracting it? Is it bringing healing or promoting distraction? Is it feeding society's wisdom or feeding its delusion? These are not questions for judgment. They are questions for awakening. They invite us to see clearly, without defensiveness. Another way of feeding the body rightly is to work in a way that supports generosity. The Buddha often spoke of lay followers who use their wealth to support the community, care for others, and share the fruits of their labor. Right livelihood is not just about personal purity, it is about relational impact. When our livelihood gives us the means to be generous, to share, to uplift others, then the body is being fed in alignment with the Dhamma. We are not just surviving, we are serving. In the Dighaja Suttas, the Buddha advises lay people to use their earnings wisely. He outlines 4 conditions for success: persistent effort in one's occupation, protection of wealth from loss or theft, association with virtuous friends, living within one's means, and avoiding debt. These principles highlight that right livelihood is not about rejecting the world, but engaging with it skillfully. A spiritual practitioner may own a business, but they run it ethically. A professional may hold a position of power, but they use it compassionately. A farmer may work the land, but they do so with care and awareness. The outer form is less important than the inner quality of intention and integrity. It is also worth noting that the Buddha never equated wealth with sin. Wealth, like fire, can cook or burn. It is not what we have, but how we relate to what we have that shapes our path. One may be rich but unattached, another may be poor but consumed by envy. Right livelihood does not glorify poverty, it glorifies freedom from clinging. Ultimately, feeding the body rightly means making peace with simplicity, aligning with ethics, and letting go of the restless hunger for more. It means earning without harming, receiving without grasping, and living without trampling others to rise. When we feed the body rightly, we begin to sense a deeper nourishment, an ease, a stability, a quiet joy. The body is cared for, and the heart is unburdened. Right livelihood asks us to remember that survival is not the ultimate goal of life. We feed the body to sustain the practice, not the other way around. The body is the boat, not the destination. When we honor it with wholesome livelihood, it becomes a vessel of awakening, not just for us, but for all beings we touch. In the Buddhist teaching, livelihood is never a matter of the body alone. It is not just about feeding the stomach or providing for material comfort. At a deeper level, right livelihood is about feeding the mind, conditioning the heart, shaping consciousness, and planting the seeds that determine our future mental states. If the way we earn our living pollutes the mind, disturbs the heart, or fuels unwholesome tendencies like greed, delusion, or agitation, then no matter how socially acceptable or financially rewarding it may be, it cannot be called right in the Buddhist sense. To feed the mind rightly means to live in a way that does not cloud it. It means recognizing that our daily activities, especially the work we do, are not spiritually neutral. They are constantly forming habits, laying down mental grooves, and creating karmic patterns. The Buddha taught that the mind is shaped by contact, by what it attends to, by the intentions it follows, and by the choices it makes. Our work is one of the most powerful and repetitive forms of contact we experience. If we spend 8 or 10 hours a day immersed in stress, deception, competition, or sensory overload, we are shaping a mind that becomes restless, reactive, or numb. Let us take a simple example. Suppose one's livelihood is in advertising. The job may be legally clean, socially praised, and intellectually stimulating. But if the primary function of that work is to stimulate craving, to convince others they are incomplete without a certain product, then what is it feeding in the mind of the worker? It is training the mind to manipulate desire, to profit from illusion, to see people not as beings on a path to awakening, but as consumers to be captured. Even if one practices meditation before or after work, those hours of mental conditioning are not neutral, they leave impressions. This is what the Buddha pointed to when he warned against livelihood that is based on trickery, falsehood, and exploitation. The outer form of the work is less important than the inner impact it has on the mind. In the Anguttara Nikaya, the Buddha emphasizes that right livelihood must be undertaken with awareness and ethical sensitivity. He describes a person who earns money righteously, but also uses it wisely to care for themselves, support their family, engage in generosity, and sustain their spiritual life. The key here is that livelihood is not merely about income, but about the mental quality that arises from it. A job that nourishes gratitude, stability, and inner peace is very different from one that nourishes anxiety, comparison, or restlessness. To feed the mind rightly, we must examine not only how we earn, but how we relate to what we earn. Many people have jobs that are ethically sound, but they are consumed by attachment to success, reputation, or advancement. The work becomes a form of addiction. The mind is always looking forward to the next promotion, the next raise, the next recognition. In such cases, it is not the job itself that is unwholesome, but the craving wrapped around it. Right livelihood includes this awareness. Am I working from a place of clarity and service, or from a place of grasping and self-image? This insight is deeply connected to right view and right intention, two other limbs of the Eightfold Path. Right livelihood is not an isolated concept. It flows from our understanding of reality. If we see the world through the lens of impermanence, suffering, and non-self, we are less likely to chase work that fuels delusion. We no longer see livelihood as a way to build a permanent identity or secure lasting pleasure. Instead, we see it as a temporary function, one that can be used skillfully to support our practice and serve others. In the Dighaja Sutta, which offers laypeople guidance on worldly and spiritual success, the Buddha advises his followers to associate with the wise, to live within their means, and to keep a balanced mind amidst gain and loss. These teachings remind us that livelihood is not just a source of income, but a field of practice. Every workplace is a microcosm of life. There are opportunities for mindfulness, generosity, patience, compassion, and insight, or for delusion, reactivity, and greed. It depends on how we approach it. This is especially relevant in modern times, where many professions exist in morally complex or spiritually confusing environments. Tech companies may create tools for connection, but also for distraction. Educational institutions may promote knowledge, but also competition and stress. Creative industries may inspire, but also encourage vanity and consumerism. There are no easy answers. What matters is that we ask the question, what is this work feeding in my mind, day after day? Feeding the mind rightly also means choosing livelihood that gives space for contemplation, for spiritual reflection, for stillness. If our work consumes all our energy, leaving us exhausted, scattered, and emotionally depleted, it becomes very difficult to cultivate mindfulness or inner peace. The Buddha did not idealize busyness. He encouraged a rhythm of life that included both effort and quietude. A livelihood that supports spiritual practice is one that respects the mind's need for silence and clarity. Finally, right livelihood in relation to the mind also involves recognizing when work becomes identity. In many cultures, people define themselves by their profession. I am a doctor. I am a teacher. I am an entrepreneur. This sense of identity becomes a source of pride, fear, or clinging. But the Buddha taught that all identities are impermanent. When we cling to the role, we fear losing it. When the job changes, we suffer. Right livelihood encourages us to let go of rigid identification. You are not your work. You are not your income. You are a being on a path toward liberation. Using work as a temporary means, not an ultimate definition. To feed the mind rightly is to live and work in a way that leaves the mind light, open, and unburdened. It is to engage with the world without being swallowed by it. It is to earn and serve, not from hunger, but from clarity. It is to work without becoming lost in work. It is to live as a human being, not a machine, not a brand, not a role, but a conscious presence, responding wisely to the conditions of life. Right livelihood is thus a practice of compassion, insight, and humility. It is not a static choice, but an ongoing inquiry. How does this work shape my mind? Does it lead me closer to freedom or deeper into bondage? When we feed the mind rightly, we prepare the soil for wisdom to grow, not just in meditation, but in every moment of our daily lives. The ideal of right livelihood shines clearly in the teachings of the Buddha. A way of living that causes no harm, supports ethical conduct, nourishes the body, and conditions the mind for awakening. But in the complex world we inhabit today, applying this principle can feel less like walking a straight path and more like navigating a maze. Economic pressures, familial obligations, legal systems, social norms, and personal aspirations all intersect to create situations that are far from black and white. That is why the Buddha never gave exhaustive lists of good and bad jobs. Instead, he gave principles. And it is up to each practitioner to reflect honestly and apply those principles with mindfulness and wisdom. Let us begin with one of the most difficult areas, gray zone professions. These are not the explicitly harmful livelihoods listed in the suttas, like selling weapons or intoxicants, but occupations that exist in moral ambiguity. Take, for instance, Someone working in fast fashion. The job may involve design, marketing, or logistics, and seem perfectly ordinary. But behind it may lie sweatshop labor, environmental destruction, and the reinforcement of consumer addiction. The question arises, is my work indirectly supporting suffering, even if I don't directly see it? In such situations, the Buddha would not demand guilt or self-condemnation. Instead, he would encourage wise reflection. The first step is seeing clearly. Many people are unaware of the wider consequences of their work. Once we become aware, we have the opportunity to explore. Can I shift my role toward greater transparency or responsibility? Can I influence the ethics of the company from within? Can I slowly transition to a more wholesome path? Even a small change rooted in intention can begin to shift the karmic momentum. The key is awareness without paralysis. If we feel trapped by our job but powerless to leave, it is important to remember that change does not always have to be dramatic or immediate. The Buddha often emphasized gradual training and yupabanasikha. What matters most is the direction of our heart. If we aspire toward right livelihood and begin to take steps, we are already on the path. The mind begins to lighten. The conscience begins to clear. The journey becomes part of the practice. Another common dilemma arises in creative professions. Artists, musicians, writers, filmmakers, designers, these vocations are often seen as spiritually neutral or even noble. But here too, right livelihood calls for subtle discernment. What is the content being produced? Is it awakening beauty and understanding in the minds of others, or feeding distraction, sensual craving, or ego inflation? Is it serving truth, or serving the market's appetite for novelty and noise? A novelist, for instance, may write with deep compassion and insight, touching people's hearts and minds. That is a beautiful offering. But another may produce content that glorifies violence, distorts truth, or reinforces harmful stereotypes, all for fame or profit. The Buddha would ask, what are you feeding in others' minds? And in your own, through this work? Right livelihood in creative fields does not mean censoring expression, but orienting it toward clarity, empathy, and truth. Similarly, in media and communication, the line between information and manipulation is thin. Journalism, education, and digital content creation can be powerful forces for good or for confusion. Right livelihood here involves a commitment to integrity, reporting truthfully, avoiding sensationalism, refusing to profit from fear or division. Even in entertainment, one can ask, am I offering temporary escape or deeper reflection? Am I stirring restlessness or sowing peace? In the modern world, technology and ethics present some of the most pressing right livelihood challenges. Many people work in industries that develop tools with both wholesome and unwholesome potential: social media, artificial intelligence, surveillance systems, gaming platforms. These technologies shape how billions of minds function every day. If you work in such fields, it is crucial to reflect. Is this work supporting mindfulness or distraction, connection or isolation, wisdom or addiction? The answers are rarely simple. A software engineer may be creating tools that help people learn the Dhamma. Another may be writing algorithms that amplify outrage and misinformation. The same platform might be used for both. Here, intention becomes central. The Buddha emphasized satana, volition, as the root of karma. Ask yourself, why am I doing this work? What do I hope it will lead to in the world? When our intentions are clear, even complex work can become part of the path. One also must acknowledge the real challenges faced by those in financial difficulty, or those living in regions with limited job options. The Buddha was deeply practical. He did not expect practitioners to live outside of society or abandon their responsibilities overnight. In the Sigalovada Sutta, he praises those who care for parents, support families, fulfill duties, and engage in honest trade. Right livelihood is not a rejection of work. It is a call to do what we must do with awareness, restraint, and aspiration toward less harm. Even within the most ordinary jobs, retail, customer service, delivery, cleaning, there is space for spiritual dignity. If one works with mindfulness, kindness, and honesty, any task becomes noble. One need not be a monk or scholar to live rightly. Sweeping floors can become a practice in humility. Serving customers can become a practice in patience. Managing a team can become a training ground in right speech and right intention. The outer form of the work is only part of the picture. The inner attitude is where the Dhamma truly lives. And yet, Right livelihood is not only about the absence of harm, it is also about the presence of benefit. Can your work uplift? Can it heal? Can it support those who are suffering? Professions such as nursing, caregiving, teaching, environmental work, and social service can become powerful vehicles for compassion. These fields offer opportunities to practice generosity, presence, and selflessness. The challenge here is not harm, but burnout. When serving others, one must also protect their own mind through balance and reflection. Lastly, we must address the identity dilemma, the tendency to over-identify with our work. In capitalist cultures, one's job becomes one's value. Losing a job can feel like losing the self. But in the Dhamma, all roles are impermanent. The Buddha reminds us that we are not farmers or programmers or doctors. We are beings subject to aging, sickness, and death. To live rightly is to see livelihood as a temporary function, not a permanent identity. We do our duties with care, but we are not defined by them. In real-world situations, right livelihood is not a fixed destination. It is an evolving inquiry. It is not about judging others, but examining oneself. It is not about fleeing society, but transforming one's role within it. The path is not always perfect, but it can always be intentional. Even a small act of honesty in a corrupt system, even a single compassionate decision in a competitive industry, these are steps toward liberation. In the end, right livelihood is not a rigid rule, it is a living question. How can I live in this world without becoming entangled in it? How can I feed body and mind without feeding illusion? To live in this inquiry is to keep the flame of the path alive, even in the marketplace, even in the office, even in the midst of ordinary life. As we journey deeper into the Buddha's teaching on right livelihood, we begin to sense that its true scope reaches far beyond external occupations or economic ethics. Yes, the Buddha spoke of harmful trades to avoid and wholesome conduct to cultivate. But beneath these surface guidelines lies a subtler invitation. To see that the most important livelihood is not what we do to survive, but how we live from moment to moment. This is the realm of inner livelihood, the mind's way of feeding itself, of sustaining identity, desire, and craving, or of letting them go. In the deepest sense, every moment is a kind of work. With each breath, the mind reaches for something. It constructs narratives, clings to experiences, builds and maintains a sense of me and mine. In this light, even without a formal job, the mind is always busy, craving, resisting, seeking, defending. It is working constantly to sustain the illusion of permanence in a world of change, to sustain ego in a world of not-self. This subtle effort is itself a kind of livelihood, a striving to feed delusion. And the Dhamma invites us to abandon that job. The Buddha's path is one of letting go of all unwholesome forms of livelihood, outer and inner. He asks us not only to give up professions that harm others, but to give up the inner employment of clinging, which harms ourselves. He does not merely point to better ways of earning money. He points to freedom from the very hunger that drives worldly becoming. This is why renunciation is such a central theme in his teaching, not because having things is bad, but because craving them traps the mind in a cycle of restlessness. In this view, we can say that right livelihood is not just about work, it is about the energy of becoming. In the teachings of dependent origination, the Buddha shows how craving leads to clinging, and clinging leads to becoming. This constant mental construction of I am. Livelihood, in this spiritual framework, refers not only to how we feed the body, but to how we feed the illusion of self. Every time we act from greed, hatred, or delusion, we're investing in that illusion. We are workers in the factory of sasra. This is why the ultimate right livelihood is not a job. It is a way of being that does not feed becoming. It is a life lived from awareness rather than compulsion, from presence rather than projection. It is livelihood that arises from non-clinging. And such livelihood can be found not only in monasteries, but in kitchens, classrooms, hospitals, and gardens. What matters is not the task, but the intention and awareness behind it. The Buddha himself was a teacher, arguably a profession. But his teaching was not a career, it was a gift. He did not sell the Dhamma. He did not promote himself. He gave freely, out of compassion. This is the spirit of right livelihood at its highest level, to offer one's actions to the welfare of beings, without seeking gain or self-definition in return. In the Ita-Vitaka, the Buddha says, "This is what should be done by one who is skilled in goodness. Let them be humble, not conceited, contented, and easily satisfied. This contentment, this simple sufficiency, is the essence of right livelihood. It is inner work. To live rightly, then, is to feed the body without harming, and to feed the mind without clinging. But even this points to something deeper. The one who truly lives rightly ceases to live in the ordinary sense. The process of me trying to exist, to accumulate, to become, gradually falls silent. This is the path to nibbana, not a place, but a cessation, a stopping of the inner hunger, a full release from all livelihood rooted in becoming. This is why the path to awakening culminates in the arahant, the one who has no more work to do. The arahant has completed the task. Their mind no longer reaches, clings, or manufactures identity. Their livelihood, inner and outer, is fully pure. Even if they engage in daily tasks, their heart is unbound. They are the true embodiment of right livelihood, not because of what they do, but because of what they no longer do. They no longer feed delusion. For most of us, this state is still distant, but it serves as a compass. We may still have jobs, responsibilities, and roles to play, yet we can begin to withdraw from the inner factory of craving. We can observe the mind when it tries to define itself through work, through success, through comparison. We can smile gently and choose not to follow. We can start to earn our inner livelihood through mindfulness, compassion, and clarity, no longer feeding the fires of becoming, but watering the seeds of peace. In this way, the teaching of right livelihood becomes profoundly personal. It is not about labels, reputations, or appearances. It is about what we feed, inside and out. A person sweeping the floor with mindfulness and a pure heart may be living more rightly than a spiritual teacher speaking from ego. The path is not about titles, it is about intention, impact, and inner freedom. To live rightly is to live lightly. To feed body and mind in ways that lead to release, not entanglement. To do work that supports the end of work, not the cessation of activity, but the cessation of delusion. In every moment, we can ask, what am I feeding now? Is this livelihood, or is this becoming? Is this sustenance, or is this clinging? When these questions become natural, and our responses come from wisdom rather than habit, we are truly walking the path of Sammā-ājīva. And that path, step by step, leads to the only place worth arriving at, a heart that needs no occupation because it is already full, a life that works not to become something, but to express what already is: awareness, compassion, and freedom. We have now traveled through the many dimensions of right livelihood, from its ethical foundations in the Pāli Canon, through its application in the modern world, to its deepest spiritual meaning as the abandonment of inner clinging. And what we have seen, again and again, is that livelihood is not merely a matter of employment or economic function. It is an active expression of our view, our values, and our inner priorities. Livelihood is the way we relate to the world and to ourselves. It is the bridge between inner cultivation and outer action, in a world that often praises success at any cost. The Buddha invites us to a radically different vision, a livelihood that is simple, ethical, compassionate, and liberating. A way of life that causes no harm, cultivates no delusion, and supports the ending of suffering. This is not always the easiest path. It may involve sacrifice, transition, or standing apart from popular values. But it is a path of peace, and it is always available, regardless of wealth, status, or occupation. Right livelihood reminds us that how we earn a living shapes the mind that does the living, the job we perform, the food we consume, the people we serve. These are not external matters, but internal reflections. They form the soil in which our mental habits grow. If we sow seeds of stress, deception, or greed in our work, we cannot expect peace to blossom in meditation. If our way of feeding the body harms others, the heart cannot fully rest. There is no separation between our outer work and our inner path. And yet, this teaching is not here to provoke guilt or anxiety. It is a call to clarity and courage. Most people do not begin their spiritual journey with perfect conditions. We come with tangled situations, with jobs we never questioned, with responsibilities we cannot yet abandon. The Buddha knew this. That is why he emphasized gradual training, patient development, and the transformative power of intention. Even in imperfect work, we can bring mindfulness. Even in ethically gray environments, we can act with kindness and restraint. Even when surrounded by craving, we can choose generosity. These are not small steps. These are the foundations of right livelihood in action. With each wholesome decision, we strengthen the roots of ethical living. With each compassionate intention, we realign our inner compass toward the Dhamma. Ultimately, right livelihood is not a rigid list of rules. It is a living inquiry. Does my way of living reduce suffering or reinforce it? Does it support truth or distortion? Does it feed clarity or confusion in the mind? Does it lead toward awakening or deeper entanglement? When these questions are asked sincerely, they act as a lamp, illuminating our daily path. They allow us to move through the world not with blind conformity, but with wise discernment. We become not merely workers in the world, but students of the Dhamma in every task. We begin to see livelihood not as an obstacle, but as an opportunity, a continuous practice ground where each choice can become a step toward freedom. There is no ideal job that guarantees right livelihood. There is no profession that will, by itself, lead to awakening. What matters is the quality of awareness, ethics, and compassion we bring into our work. One may be a janitor or a judge, a craftsman or a coder. What matters is whether we are harming or helping, clinging or letting go, waking up or falling deeper into sleep. And as we cultivate right livelihood, something profound begins to shift. The split between spiritual life and worldly life begins to fade. Work becomes meditation. Livelihood becomes Dhamma. The office, the classroom, the marketplace, they become sacred fields where generosity is practiced, where mindfulness is sharpened, where wisdom is lived. Our daily life becomes our monastery. Our body becomes our altar. Our choices become our prayer. In the end, to live rightly is not to be perfect. It is to walk this path with sincerity and steadiness. It is to be willing to examine, to adjust, to aspire. It is to feed the body with care and the mind with wisdom. It is to work in the world without being owned by it. It is to earn not just money, but merit. And ultimately, it is to live in such a way that nothing in our life contradicts the peace we seek on the cushion. The Buddha did not offer us a career guide. He offered us a path to freedom. Right livelihood is one step on that path, quiet, steady, powerful. Let us walk it with integrity. Let us live in such a way that, day by day, the mind grows lighter, the heart grows clearer, and the work of this life becomes the work of awakening. And in the silence beyond striving, we may find the deepest truth, that when the mind no longer hungers and the heart no longer clings, we are already sustained. That the greatest livelihood is not in what we do, but in what we are, aware, ethical, free.